With Marvin, there's no delicate. You just have a conversation. He is a performer at heart. He loved telling his story. He loved telling the high points and bragging about how he would score 50 points a game with his eyes closed, and the low points about how his goal in life was to be a pimp and a drug dealer and to live fast and die young. And he told them with equal exuberance and no apologies.
Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
Hey gang, it's Tim Hanlon. Indeed, this is Good Seats Still Available, the curious little podcast that's focused on what used to be in professional sports. Thank you for joining me, as always. Today we're talking about basketball, pro basketball, American Basketball Association basketball, the ABA, with our guest today, Dan Forer, who is the director and the producer of the ESPN 30 for 30 documentary from 2013 called Free Spirits, which is focused on the short-lived ride of the St. Louis Spirits, or as they were officially known, the Spirits of St. Louis, from 74 to 76, I believe it was. And some great stories coming up from Dan Forer, who is also timely for us because he also is the producer and director of a brand new film that, if you're listening in late April, when we drop this episode, is debuting in a world premiere fashion. His new documentary called Mike and the Mad Dog, all about Mike Francesa and Chris Mad Dog Russo, the dynamic duo in New York City sports radio that in many respects actually birthed a new format for radio in this country. They have since separated professionally, but who knows if they get back together again. But Mike and Chris Russo are very much established in the firmament of sports talk in the New York metropolitan area, nationally as well. And it's the film about them called Mike and the Mad Dog is out there at the Tribeca Film Festival in late April, and will be on ESPN proper and the various platforms of ESPN sometime this summer. We think maybe sometime in July, and you'll probably know that by now if you're listening to this show. So Dan Forer is our guest, coming up in just a second. Quick shout out to everybody who has sent all kinds of great commentary and attaboys to us on our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com. Please indeed follow us on social media. On Twitter, you'll find us at Good Seats Still. That's at Good Seats Still. You will find us on Instagram at Good Seats Still Available. We have a Facebook page, if you can say it properly, about the show as well. And if you want to send us email or sign up for our newsletter, all that kind of stuff, go to the website. Again, goodseatsstillavailable.com. Thank you a ton for listening. Thank you a ton for giving us some shot of adrenaline as we continue to stumble our way through this adventure together. So thank you. Okay, let's not waste any more time. Let's hit the pause button on me and start up the conversation we had just a few days ago with Dan Forer here on the show.
So why are you interested in the Spirits?
Well, I think the first good question, I believe, would be, why were you interested in the Spirits enough to make a really cool documentary about it for the ESPN 30 for 30 project?
I was actually approached by ESPN and asked if I knew anything about the ABA. And I told them I did, that I was a fan of the LA Stars and the Anaheim Amigos. And they asked me if I was at all familiar with the Spirits of St. Louis. And I said, you mean Bad News Barnes and the gang? And they said, yes. And they asked me to submit a proposal. I think they were looking at a couple of other people as well. And I submitted it. And about 2 weeks later, they called up and they said, can you submit a budget? And about a week later, I submitted a budget. And shortly after that, they said, we'd like you to do an hour-long 30 for 30 on the Spirits of St. Louis.
Well, okay, so why were you approached about the ABA? There must have been some knowledge out there in basketball and sports land from your past experiences that you had some experience or knowledge of the ABA, no?
Not really. Not really. I had done a prior film, a documentary called Second Chance Season, about a young man named Nick Young, and his senior year of high school. He had thought that he had a senior year of high school coming, and was told that he was mistaken, that he had completed 4 years of high school, and what he thought was his junior year was actually his senior year. And then 3 weeks before school started, the principal went to the school board and explained that while he had attended or been enrolled in 4 years of high school, he had only attended 3 because his freshman year he could not attend the school with members of the gang that had murdered his brother. And so he was given a second chance at his senior year. And we followed Nick Young through his senior year and through 3 years at USC, and his rivalry with a crosstown friend named Jordan Farmar, who went to UCLA. And we produced a film called Second Chance Season, which was purchased by ESPN Films. Few people are aware that they had a 30 for 30 year at ESPN, and then they wanted to continue doing documentaries. And so they said, well, it's no longer our 30th anniversary, so we're just going to call it ESPN Films Presents. So they then did a year or so of documentaries under the banner ESPN Films, but everybody kept calling them 30 for 30s. And no matter how much they tried, everybody kept calling them 30 for 30s. So they just threw in the towel and said, okay, it's not our 30th anniversary anymore, but we're going to stick with the branding, and it's 30 for 30. So Free Spirits was actually my second documentary for ESPN, and they had known about the first one, and they had purchased it, and they enjoyed it very much.
All right, well, this is a good time to take a quick pause and rewind for a quick second, because as our audience knows through the intro, which you have yet to hear, but you will have had played out by now, you have a tremendous career, an Emmy Award-winning multiple times career in, let's call it primetime television, but also in sports, right? A longtime CBS sports producer for dozens of events, and, a producer, a writer, a director. So, you obviously come with a pretty significant pedigree besides that one, that first documentary for ESPN, of course.
Thank you. Yeah, I've been very, very fortunate and been blessed with tremendous opportunities and the chance to work with some remarkable people.
Well, okay, so that out of the way, and the bow to your prowess in career. So your assignment is the St. Louis Spirits. Where do you even begin? Walk us through a little bit of the process about A, processing the Spirits and what you may or may not have known about them, and then B, the process of actually putting together a film such as this.
I started by doing some online research and going through the story, and an invaluable resource was a book called I guess it was Terry Pluto's book
called Loose Balls, and it is sitting right here on my desk, staring me in the face. The original 1990 copy, signed and autographed by the author. Yes, know it well.
Wonderful. He was the contrarian in the film, and he was fantastic.
He was.
Because he was so candid and honest about his opinions, and he was one of the few people who does not love Marvin Barnes. But as I read his book and I did my research, it became evident very early on that the story of the Spirits of St. Louis is actually the story of Marvin Barnes. He was a three-ring circus, and he was the circus master. He was the one in charge. Everything revolved around him. So then I tried to get an appointment with him, and I flew back, and I was told adamantly by a gentleman named Mike Carey, who was his biographer, that there's no way in the world he's going to do this. And Mike at the time thought that doing a documentary on these spirits, and including Marvin, was going to hurt his, which he had not sold yet. Over a period of time, I started to become friends with Mike, and he began to realize that it wasn't going to hurt his book. It was going to help his book. And then gradually, with Mike's blessing, Marvin came on board and agreed to be a part of it. And once Marvin was on board, I knew we had the linchpin to the story, and then we went around, seeing who else we could get. And for the most part, everybody wanted to participate. It was not hard. Even the owners at that time wanted to participate, Dan and Ozzie Silna.
Sure.
And so, this was going to be a piece of cake. And so we start lining up the interviews, and about 2 weeks into production, I get a call from Dan, extremely apologetic, and he says, our attorneys won't let us be interviewed. And I said, excuse me? We've gone forward. They've greenlit it. We've got a budget. We're ready to go. He goes, we've got a little something going on, which you'll hear about shortly, but, don't count on us to participate, but we would love to. And I said, okay. I said, can you tell me what it is? He said, you'll read about it. And lo and behold, 3 days later, there was an announcement that the owners of the Spirits of St. Louis were suing the NBA for close to $1 billion for rights that they had to television rights and other new media that they had not been paid for. And until that court case was settled, they could not participate in the documentary.
And we'll get to that sort of seminal event, because that deal obviously was a huge issue.
Yes.
But the movie on ESPN for you debuted in October of 2013, right? And I
right.
guess
we started in 2012.
Right. But after that, though, I think the year after, I guess, is when the Silnas actually, I don't call it a settlement, but it seems like they came to some kind of long-term sort of terminal agreement of a big lump sum that kind of ended the entire perpetuity thing, right?
There was a settlement, and believe it or not, it is still going on, and there is a small fraction of payments which continue to be in perpetuity. Most of it is done, and most of it was settled, and they wanted to do that for their heirs, which was done. And once it had settled, I think one of the first phone calls that Dan Silna made was to me, and he says, "Hey, we can talk." And I went back to ESPN and said, they can talk. What do you want to do? And they said, let's update the documentary. So there were actually two versions of Free Spirits out there, one without the Silnas, and a second one which we did at a reunion that they had for the team, where we interviewed them and a few of the players again after the settlement to update it.
And that's the part with the cap at the end of the movie that you remember what the inscription on the back of those caps were?
In spirit, in perpetuity.
Which is the irony. Okay, well, since we did bring it up, and arguably that is sort of the final chapter, but we can work our way back. Do you want to walk our listeners through? And I would imagine most of our listeners to this sort of niche of sports history will probably already know the bare bones of the story. But for those uninitiated, do you want to sort of give a little encapsulation of what was arguably the sports deal of the, I don't know, millennium?
Well, here's it really has to deal not with the Spirits, but with what people call the merger between the NBA and the ABA.
Sure.
The ABA had shrunk down, I think, from 13 teams to 7 teams at the beginning of 1975. And the Silnas, the sole reason for them getting involved in the ABA, and they only owned the Spirits for 2 years, was they had seen the merger between the NFL and the AFL, and they thought this was an opportunity to get a basketball team and merge with the NBA. So that was their goal. At the beginning of the year, when the league started to fall apart, they realized that, it's unlikely that the NBA is going to take 7 teams. They thought they would probably take 6 teams, and that one team would be left out. So they came up with a formula. They were very, very ethical, rather religious Jews who were in the schmata or the clothing business from Jersey. There was sons of immigrants. And so they wanted to be fair. And they wanted to be fair to the one owner who was going to be left out. And they said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to give them some money. And since there are 7 teams in it right now, every team will contribute 1/7 of their television revenues to the team that isn't allowed to join. And this was their plan, and they never in their wildest dreams thought that they would not be allowed to join. They were certain, because they ran such a good franchise in their mind, that they would be allowed to join the NBA. Well, at the end of the season, one of the teams dropped out. There were 6 teams left. And now the Silnas were feeling pretty good, and they were going to take care of the one team that dropped out. And the NBA wanted to take 4 teams, not 6. Their television contract said they would get more money if they took a minimum of 4 teams. And so the NBA said, what do we need 6 for? We'll just do 4. And so what they did at that time was they went through the 4. They took Denver, they took San Antonio, they took Indiana, and they took the New York Nets. And so suddenly, Kentucky Colonels, John Y. Brown, was out, and he settled for about $3.2 million. When I say settled, it isn't with the NBA. The NBA told the ABA, get your case in order, get rid of all the people, all the teams that aren't with you anymore, settle with them, and then come to us, and we will take you in. And so what was left was the Spirits of St. Louis, and the other teams offered them money. They didn't want money. They wanted to be part of the NBA, and they kept begging to be part of the NBA. And they figured as long as they had some attachment to the NBA, they would be okay. And what fell back on was this idea that they had for the 17 they applied to themselves. And it was that, hey, we'll take a little bit of money, I think it was $2.1 million, but we want 1/7 of the TV revenue of all 4 teams that went in. And the teams at that time weren't really in it. There was no TV revenue. They were prohibited from taking any for 3 years. And at the time, it was a small contract. It didn't amount to anything. But they were still reluctant to do it. And Donald Shupak, who was a minority owner, but also the attorney, what he did was he took all of the other teams on a hot August week in New York, and he brought them to their office. And he wouldn't let them leave until they agreed to these terms. And I think he kept them there 3 or 4 days and was sweating. He turned off the air conditioning, opened the windows. He was running around, and he tells the story in gym shorts and a T-shirt. And they're sitting around in suits and trying to negotiate this. And so finally they agreed. And at the time, again, it was nothing. So they went away, and they thought, okay, we've got a little something to keep us with the NBA. If they expand again, they'll come back to us. Well, over the years, that little bit, that 1/7 or 4/7 from the 4 teams, ended up being worth tens of millions of dollars, and then hundreds of millions of dollars, and then eventually, when they won their lawsuit, $500 million. And they were the extra owners in the NBA, and there were times during the over the decades where they tried to get teams. They tried to buy the New York Nets, and one of the agreements that the NBA demanded was that they give up their settlement on the TV revenue. They refused; they were not allowed in.
And that's interesting because you elicit a couple of opinions there that during the film, I think Bob Costas in particular said it was his opinion that Dan and Ozzie would have been early on satisfied with simply getting a franchise.
Well, that's all they wanted. All they wanted the day they died. The day that Ozzie died, Dan is still with us. That's all they wanted was to be part of it. And ironically, the commissioner was on their side and worked very hard. He liked them, and he wanted them. David Stern liked them and wanted to try and get them team. And on 2 or 3 occasions, he tried to be the mediator, and other owners with the still hurt feelings from all these years said no.
But the reasons why, though, it seems fairly clear, certainly through the movie, but I guess in other research as well, that St. Louis, for some reason, never really took as a professional basketball town, right? I mean, you had a pro NBA team that came and left and went to Atlanta, and then St. Louis Spirits did not do very well. You have a couple of great still shots in the film, Free Spirits on ESPN and on DVD. We'll tell you about where else to get it later. Where just a completely barren, empty St. Louis arena.
Right. They won the NBA championship a few years before the Spirits got there. And they had a little bit of a following, but face it, St. Louis is a baseball town first and a hockey town second.
So, moving on then to Mr. Barnes, right? So, how did once you were able to get him to say yes, how did you kind of back into his story, the sort of quixotic nature of his personality, but then obviously the tragic components of it as well? How do you delicately approach a subject like that will be complex and have highs and lows as an interview subject?
With Marvin, there's no delicate. You just have a conversation. He is a performer at heart. He loved telling his story. He loved telling the high points and bragging about how he would score 50 points a game with his eyes closed, and the low points about how his goal in life was to be a pimp and a drug dealer and to live fast and die young. And he told them with equal exuberance and no apologies.
I think many people regard him before his drug problems and whatnot is arguably one of the greatest, shall we say, wasted or lost talents in basketball history in this country.
I don't think there's any question about that. It is almost as if the game was too easy for him, and so that he could turn it on when he wanted and just demolish people, and then he'd get bored. And he played very lackadaisical, and it would be embarrassment. I mean, there were times where he was benched just for not listening to the coach, not paying attention to anything going out on the court.
Well, do you think he was enabled? Because it's pretty clear that the owners and the management tried to pretty much build, kind of the team around his prowess on the basketball court, but also his personality, I guess, too, to a certain extent. Yeah,
he had an enabler. The enabler's name was Fly Williams. Fly was a Harlem playground legend, from Austin P. And when he got there, he introduced Marvin to street drugs, and Marvin liked it very, very much. There's one of my favorite stories from the documentary. In doing the interviews, is we sat down with Fly, and he said, here's what I did my first year on the team, and here's what I did, second season. And I said, Fly, wait a second. You weren't on the team second season. You were cut in training camp because you didn't get along with the coach. He goes, oh, I was on the team second season. I said, you were on the team? I said, you traveled with the team. He goes, yeah, I traveled to every game. I said, you traveled to I said, you weren't on the team. He cut you. I said, what position were you? He goes, oh, I was the team pusher. And he then explained how for that entire second season, his job was to pick up drugs in New York, bring them back to St. Louis for home games, and then travel with the team to away games. And he would arrange the party after the games, and not just for the Spirits of St. Louis, but whatever team they were playing. All the parties, all the members who were inclined to do so would get together with hookers and drugs and alcohol after the game and party until late into the hours, and then the next morning they'd get up and they'd go on to the next city. And he was the one who introduced Marvin. Marvin had the money, so Marvin then bought an apartment in St. Louis strictly for going and doing drugs and having hookers.
I mean, that's stunning stuff, and you also have a bit of story in the film too about Gus Gerard, another quality player that got ensnared, I guess, into sort of the drug habit and culture as well.
If Fly was Marvin's enabler, Marvin was Gus's enabler. He was the one who introduced him. They liked to smoke pot a lot together, and it had some dire consequences for Gus, who made a lot of money. But in the end, the drugs took over. He lost all of his money. He lost his family. He tried to asphyxiate himself by parking his car in a garage and running it. But before he died, and before the fumes killed him, the car ran out of gas. So he just passed out and was found there. I think it was by his sister. I'm not certain of that. And survived and gradually put his life back together to the point where today he is now a drug counselor helping other people.
Well, lest our audience think that was all sort of sad and maudlin, and obviously these are tragic stories that are clearly life-changing and clearly some silver linings coming out of that. You have some great quotes in there. I mean, Dr. J, I think, kind of summed it up. He basically kind of said that Marvin Barnes, and then I guess a little bit to the franchise itself, especially in the second year with all that talent, that that pretty much the Spirits kind of had, and Barnes in particular, had as much talent as anybody out there, maybe even more so, but were just essentially self-destructive. Do you think that's a fair assessment to the team? Certainly for Marvin.
Absolutely fair assessment. They had basically an all-star team their second year when things fell apart. But Dr. J knows personally from the first year, the Nets were defending champions, had beaten the Spirits 11 times in a row, and then the first game of the first round of the playoffs. And then Marvin and Fly and Maurice Lucas, they went on a tear, and they won the last 4 games in a row, both at home and on the road, and upset the defending champions in what is considered by many to be one of the greatest upsets in professional basketball history.
And in the film Free Spirits, there's a great setup there. You've got the actual film. So where did the game footage come from? And did you take that game footage and then splice in Costas's radio broadcast, or was that all part of one sole broadcast?
Roger Holstein was Bob Costas' roommate at Syracuse University. He was the one who helped him get his first job, which was as announcer for the Spirits. Roger had a connection to the owners, and so it was a little incestuous, but he brought Bob in, and Bob was the announcer. Roger had one 20-minute highlight VHS of that season. On that tape were the highlights, including Bob's call, which was, for me, the highlight of the up part of the film.
Sure.
It was just wonderful. And Bob, for him, he loved working on the film because it allowed him to share with his children his early beginnings. But yeah, we had one 20-minute tape. I sent Jason Healy, our associate producer, to St. Louis for 10 days to scour the Historical Society, every local TV station, every radio station, to see what we could find, and he came back with, I would say, probably about 40 minutes of footage, and we made that work for the entire film.
So help our audience out a bit, because obviously we spend a lot of time, and we'll continue to spend a lot of time working towards getting more insight into these various documentaries and whatnot about teams and leagues and whatnot. If you can explain how enormously difficult, I'm assuming, it is to not only find that great footage and then be able to use it and put it together, but then also clear it for legal rights and the costs of such. It's pretty daunting, isn't it?
I wish I could tell you that it is daunting and hard. It's not. There's a legal loophole which you can use, and it's called fair use. Fair use basically says that I have every right to tell a story, and I should make every effort to find and clear footage with the owners and pay them for that footage. However, if there is footage that I cannot clear or cannot pay for, or somebody doesn't want to give me, what I am able to do is turn it over to a specialized attorney called a fair use attorney. He looks at it and says, this story cannot be told without that footage. You have every right to use it in order to tell the story. So in every film that I do, there is some footage that we send to the attorney, and he says, yes, you need this to tell the story. It's fair use. And so ideally you do go out, you find it, you purchase it, you get all the rights you need, and we do that for 90% of the material. But if you get in a jam, you can lean back on fair use, and you have a legal right to do that.
Music, however, a little bit more nettlesome.
Believe it or not, you can do the same thing for music.
Interesting.
If you try to get it. I just ran into this actually earlier today. For a documentary we're currently doing that'll premiere at the Tribeca Film Festival called Mike and the Mad Dog, about the two gentlemen who are credited with starting contemporary sports talk radio. In that, we have Chris Russo, one of the two sports talk hosts, singing for all of 2 seconds. And God help me, he's singing a Bruce Springsteen song. And I could not afford to use that. But it's him singing, covering a song at a rally that they were doing. And so we sent it over to the attorney, and the attorney looked at it, and he said, yeah, this is about Chris singing. It's not about the song, and he declared it fair use. So we are okay with that. I don't think that anybody would complain about it, but we want to be on safe ground, so that's what we have done. We would not use it if we didn't have that declared. Every other bit of music that is in it for the hour is cleared and registered, and everything is fine with it.
And since you brought it up, let us take this quick promotional pause here to indeed remind folks that Mike and the Mad Dog is world premiering at the Tribeca Film Festival. We are going to drop this episode to the world on the 17th of April, but you will be making that grand debut on Friday, April 21st in New York City at the Tribeca Film Festival. It's called Mike and the Mad Dog. Anybody who grew up in New York and has listened to either Mike Francesa or Chris Mad Dog Russo will be like a moth to a flame to this film. I have not seen it, but I'm sure that I will relish it and devour it when it comes out, and I can actually access it myself.
We have 5 screenings over the week in New York, and then I'm told that it will most likely premiere on ESPN July 17th.
So there you go. If you're hearing this between now and then, keep your DVRs set for Mike and the Mad Dog coming up this summer, sometime in July, we think, on
if anybody
ESPN
enjoys sports talk radio even a little bit, I think they will enjoy this film. It talks about how sports talk got big in the 90s and the early 2000s, and focuses on the stellar careers of two gentlemen who are unique personalities. And they had a relationship that was very tumultuous and very rewarding for about 19 years.
Indeed. And I will not regale you with my Mad Dog Russo imitation, which is actually pretty good, I'm told, but usually in bar settings. So let's get as we kind of maybe sort of try to put a coup de grace here, I guess, or a cap here on the Spirits story. What in the process of making this film and the various people that you interviewed? I mean, again, Bob Costas, his first real professional gig. You've got Brent Musburger in there with a couple of great quotes. Obviously, Steve Snapper Jones. Did you learn anything new that you didn't know about the story? And frankly, some of the people involved, were they challenging, intriguing things, different sides of people that you didn't really know about? Any sort of revelations in the process?
No major revelations. What you learn always doing this is that, you do your research and you know the stories that you want them to talk about. But when you ask three different people to tell you about the story, you get three different versions of the story. And then when you remind them what somebody else said, oh yeah, and it kind of snowballs a little and builds a little. And one of the things that I enjoy is watching the people we interview reminisce about those stories. Hearing them take the different tacks. Marvin saw himself as a young Muhammad Ali, and he wanted to be a poet. So, he wrote that poem, there once was a doctor named Irving whose slam dunks were especially unnerving, but when Marvin gets moving and the crowd gets to grooving, for the doctor or hospital, they'll be reserving. And he tried really hard to get everybody on board. When we asked people, was he Ali? Some people would say, yeah, kind of a little bit, and other people would just laugh hysterically and say he was the furthest thing from Ali. And so hearing the different sides of the different stories were really, really nice. And then sitting in an editor room and blending them so you can pick the most entertaining version of it is always fun. There were a couple of people that we interviewed who always after they're done have second thoughts about things they say.
Any come to mind?
Everything was really positive. The only negative in doing Free Spirits was we had an incident with Rod Thorne. Rod Thorne had gotten into it with Fly Williams. He was the coach who dismissed him from the team during before the season started. And after the interview, Rod Thorne declined to sign his release. And I always ask for a verbal release before we start interviews so they know why they're doing it and they're giving us permission to use it. And so afterwards he declined to sign the release. He was concerned that he would come out looking bad with some of the criticisms that he had Fly. But when we put it in and he saw it, he was okay with it.
So in telling the entire Spirit story, I mean, how much do you think of a microcosm that team was for the entire league? I mean, you said you grew up or went to earlier on Amigos games and LA Stars games. I mean, were the Spirits somewhat unique in their own sort of way, or was it emblematic of a wild and woolly time in that league?
They were the ABA on steroids. Everything that was the ABA you had in the Spirits, but it was a little bigger, a little louder. The promotions they did a little crazier. Ironically, they didn't draw any fans. But the one night that they could draw fans was ball night, but they didn't have enough balls. And so they had 2,000 fans who didn't get ABA red, white, and blue balls, and there was a small riot, and they had to call the police in to calm things down. Everything, the drugs, the hookers, the crazy play, the feuds, the partying, that was all part of the ABA, but it seems like the Spirits did it a little bolder than everybody else.
Well, look, it's a fascinating story, and if anybody needs a primer on the American Basketball Association, you could do worse than to see the movie Free Spirits, which, again, came out in 2013. on ESPN. I know that they replay it on an ongoing and regular basis, and obviously it's available in digital form and DVD form. And Dan Forer, you've been terrific as a guest, telling us about the story, the whole the legacy of the team and the league, but also your adjunct into it and how you made it, and maybe perhaps a few lessons learned from the process. Any other projects besides the huge spotlight of Mike and the Mad Dog for the next couple of months that you have on your horizon, particularly in sports?
No, we have two projects that I'm currently working on. One has to do with NASCAR in the late 1960s, an incident that occurred there where some aerospace engineers got involved for 1 year and changed the sport, and then were banned from the sport. And then another one involving the University of Memphis basketball team in the early 70s and the impact that they had on the city following the death of Dr. Martin Luther King. Very interesting. On the NASCAR one, is that the Dodge Dart spoiler issue? That would be it. That's fantastic, and I think that'll be a very interesting story. Any interesting stories learned there, or you want to save it for the film? What's fascinating about that is I originally wrote it up as a documentary proposal, but when I was done, I looked at it and I said, this is actually a feature film, and so it was shopped around Hollywood a little bit, and there's a A-list star who saw it and liked it, and if NASCAR will sign off on it, we will hopefully go into development on a feature film, not a documentary, on that story. That's fantastic. Well, we wish you luck with that project and all of your others to come, and especially we wish you tremendous success with Mike and the Mad Dog coming up in a couple of weeks, both in the film festival circuit as well as on television later this summer. So thank you, Dan, very much for your time and, frankly, more importantly, your film, Free Spirits. Thank you very much. I enjoyed it. I wish you the best of luck with your podcast. It's a wonderful topic to cover, and I think you're going to have some tremendous podcasts coming up. I look forward to listening to them. Thanks so much, Dan. Okay, there you have it. A great conversation. Thank you to Dan Forer for it. And again, the movies, plural, are Free Spirits, which is an ESPN 30 for 30 documentary that continues to sort of run out there in the ESPN platform land. So keep an eye out for that. It's also available digitally or DVD. You can find a link to all that stuff on our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com. And also keep an eye out for the premiere on television, we believe sometime in the middle of July, of Dan's current film, or new film, called Mike and the Mad Dog, the story behind Mike Francesa and Chris Mad Dog Russo and WFAN sports talk radio, and the genre of sports talk radio that arguably they were responsible for catalyzing and continue to pioneer with today. My thanks again to Dan Forer for the conversation, and my thanks again to you, the listener, for putting us in your earbuds and for giving us a spin. We appreciate it. We'll see you online. We'll see you on our various social feeds, and we've got lots of great stuff coming up. Again, our thanks for listening, and more to come. Take care, everybody.